Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 155 in the series. Welcome back to the Yard Room. This is the winter break edition of the podcast. We are about to have kids and holidays and travel and all kinds of things happening, so I thought I'd come up here and spend a quiet moment with all of you before the shenanigans begin. This episode has a lot of stuff in it. We're going to do works in progress. I know some of you really like seeing my knits as they're in progress, so this is one of the gift knits that is well underway, but we need to discuss some of the things going on with it. I also have some recommendations for winter break reading. If you are, like me, going to snuggle down for the next month or so and have a little bit more free time, maybe, I've got some knitting book recommendations for you, things I'm going to peruse over the break. For those of you who are coming back, welcome back. It's lovely to see you. I hope you have an awesome winter, holiday, New Year thing in the works for yourself, whatever that is. And if you are new to the podcast, welcome. This is a podcast mostly about garment design and modification in particular. I will talk about some of the modifications I did to this particular sweater. But I also love teaching, I love needle felting, I love all kinds of other knitting, so we talk about a lot of things on the podcast. So you are very welcome here. I hope you find something that you like. And since it is the season of giving and thanking and all that kind of stuff, I do want to make sure I pause and say thank you to the podcast producers, and that is Lenore, Jennifer, Rose, Erika, Kendra, and Nargis. So thank you all so much for supporting the podcast. If you're interested in getting involved, you can head over to Patreon. If there are different tiers, there's all kinds of different things going on over there. Yeah, I just appreciate the support. Thank you. And the final bit of intro is where to find me, especially if you're new. You can find me everywhere as Knitting the Stash on all the socials and over on the main website, which is knittingthestash.com. Got some online classes over there. Those are good gifts to give. There is the Flock Farm Yarn Shop full of indie flock yarn from around the United States. Those are also good gifts to give. And there are gift cards in the shop. So if you are shopping late or just trying to find something woolly for somebody in your life who loves knitting or crocheting or things like that, gift cards are the way to go. You can give them. They are electronic. They are wonderful. So there you go. All right, let's jump into the episode. I have been working away on Albina McLaughlin's Turntable Pullover. Now, if you've been watching for a little while, you might remember that I'm doing some gift knitting at this point. Pretty much everyone in the family suddenly came to me and said, so, could we have sweaters too? Which is great because my sweater bin is absolutely overflowing at this point, and I'm really happy to always be knitting for other people. You know that I like to knit for Spencer. My son Zach hasn't really, he did ask for a sweater. He's not always the biggest sweater wearer, but he has asked for a lot of socks, so I've done socks for him. This one is for my daughter-in-law Erin, and we had a long exchange about like what she would like and how it could be good for her and all that kind of stuff. And we settled on this pullover and a basic kind of gray black color, which is not a color that a lot of us knit in. I know it's not a color I usually knit in, which is funny because it's the perfect kind of like wardrobe staple color, right? Like this will go with everything, which was kind of her idea. She's like, I want to be able to wear it all winter with skirts and pants and everything else. So there you go. It's a great color. It's and it's actually not too bad to knit with as far as like your darker grays and blacks go, because it does have a lot of flecks of, I think you'll see it on the camera, some flecks of kind of like white mixed in there. So it really does have a grayish, heathery background to it. I'm using the Ramagarn Fennel, which is a fingering weight yarn. I like it a lot. It's very woolly, but it's not super scratchy, and it softens up really nicely. The gauge swatch I did for this was just, it turned to like butter. It was so nice to touch. So I'm kind of excited about washing the whole sweater and seeing what happens. Yeah, and so that I like this yarn. I haven't knit with it before. I think it's really lovely for the texture of this sweater. It is an all-over ribbed sweater, so it's a 3x1 rib all over the whole body of the sweater and the sleeves. And it shows up, I think it'll show up on the camera, but I'm not positive. But it shows up really nicely in real life because of the heathering in the yarn. Anyway, there's just a lot of wonderful things going on with this yarn. So this pullover is a top-down pullover that begins usually with a turtleneck. So if you look on Albina's pages or over on Ravelry, you'll see that, you know, it has a kind of floppy turtleneck to it. So Erin didn't want a she's kind of between a crew neck and a turtleneck, so I'm still deciding on the neckline. It's something I'd like you guys to weigh in on. If you have ideas about this, I'd love to know. What I ended up doing is casting on for a crew neck, basically, by starting the pattern right before this beautiful horizontal braid that happens at the neckline. And then I worked the horizontal braid and it started working down. And I went back in and picked up stitches. You can see I put little markers here because when you pick up stitches for a neckline, you don't pick up stitch for stitch, right? So along the back, you would pick up stitch for stitch, which I did back here along the upper part of the braid. But in the front, especially if you have a little bit of shaping going on in the neckline, you don't pick up stitch for stitch. So between these two markers I did, this is like the flat front part, but from the marker up to the shoulder, I was picking up 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4, something like that, just to make sure that I wouldn't be picking up too many stitches and making the whole thing kind of flop open, or picking up too few stitches and making the whole thing cinch in. So that's what these little markers are for. And I just left them there as a reminder because I'm not sure about this neckline. The design is excellent for a turtleneck. If you begin with the turtleneck, work down, do the neck, it's like perfect. But because I was trying to modify it, I'm not super set on what I've done with the neck here. I just kind of threw a 1x1 ribbing mock turtleneck on here just to see what it would look like. Because as I cast this on, the whole neck was fairly open. That's how it's designed. It's meant to have a little bit of a cinch right around here, but it's a little bit more of an oval kind of a neck because of the turtleneck, obviously, and the design. And so I was curious what would happen when I picked up the stitches and started knitting up, just to see, could it be a crew? Does it want to be a crew? You know, those kinds of things. So I ended up doing a mock turtleneck. It sits really nicely. I put it on waste yarn. I kind of want to wash it when I wash the sweater and see what it behaves like, and then decide if, you know, it needs to be a full turtleneck, if it can stay a mock turtleneck, if it needs to go back down to the lateral braid and just have, you know, maybe an I-cord above it or something like that. So if you have advice, I'd love to know. Albina was giving me some suggestions over on Instagram, which was really fun. I love Albina. I've worked with Albina for many years. She's actually the one who's one of her sweater patterns is in my beginning modification class. I love her patterns. I love working with her. She's a wonderful human being. So she was offering suggestions. And one of her suggestions was to change the short rows in the back of the neck just a little bit to make it more amenable, make the neckline kind of sit a little bit lower and be more amenable to a crew. I think that's a great idea. I had already knit down to almost the division for the sleeves by the point that I decided to like mess around with that. So I couldn't go back and take the short rows out that I already put in. So I'm kind of working with it as it is to decide what to do with the neck. And I do think washing it, letting it relax, you know, getting it off the needles was good, putting it on waste yarn, you know, just all those kinds of things to just decide what's it want to be in the end. But if you have suggestions, I'd love to know. Because it's a top-down sweater, Albina does some really cool things with the shoulders. I'm going to try to bring it in here so you can see this beautiful line that gets created where you're doing all of your increases to create, you know, the back and the front of the sweater. It's really well done. I really like the pattern itself and the way that she takes the time to tell you, if you're not sure how to increase in pattern in a rib pattern, she takes the time to tell you how to do that. So if you are new to increasing in pattern, right? If you're knitting along and, you know, you have a 3x1 rib and you're like, okay, I need to add a new stitch. How do I add a knit stitch? You know, how do I add a purl stitch? How do I know which one to add? She walks you through stitch by stitch. So if you need that kind of instruction, it's in the pattern, which is awesome. If you don't, or once you get used to it, you can just roll with it because you just know, you're like, okay, I need to add, there needs to be a purl here, there needs to be a knit here. You know, you just kind of like are working in pattern, and it's a very rhythmic, kind of satisfying thing to do. So, and I like the details of this. The shoulder kind of opens up for the sleeve here. I think you can see that in this nice like triangular way. Almost like the raglan shaping is happening down here at the armhole. It's just a really elegant pattern in that respect. So I'm pretty excited about it. Now, because it's a gift knit, I have Erin's measurements, but when you're just working with measurements and you can't try it on the person, it's a little bit like, how are we going to do this? So one of the cool things I was telling Spencer the other night is that because this is a ribbed pattern, I did do my larger swatch and I did block it as Albina suggests, which is, really aggressively blocking it to open it up. Because, if you have a all over ribbed sweater, it tends to want to just, we all had those sweaters in the 90s, I think. I think I had a few of those ribbed turtlenecks, and boy, you wash them and they would just, right up into this tiny little thing. You're like, how does the body fit in that? This one doesn't quite work that way because it is a 3x1 rib instead of like a 2x2 or a 1x1. But it does want to close. You can see that the purl rows want to kind of close down to allow the knits to sit next to each other. So this will block out a little bit baggier. It will have more ease to it once I block it. But the cool thing about a 3x1 rib pattern like this is that if Erin decides she wanted it to not be as baggy or have as much ease, she could just wash it. The miracle of wool, right? You can wash it, soak it in some water, and then just block it differently. So it could look like this. It could look, much baggier and have more ease, so that the shoulders kind of, in a lot of the pictures on Ravelry, you see the shoulders are kind of sitting like a drop shoulder almost. So yeah, it's kind of a forgiving fabric. And unlike a stockinette where you get what you get, and you can block it, but there's only so far you want to block stockinette. This one you can actually make it change, which is it's like a transformer sweater, which is kind of cool. It's also got a little bit of the retro thing going on, which is why it's the turntable pullover, I think. I like that. So modifications, I did a provisional cast on for my underarm stitches here. She might have suggested that in the pattern. I'm trying to remember. I always do it. It's just something that I like to do because then you have live stitches under your arms that you can, you're obviously knitting down, but then you can pick them up because they're sitting there live to do the rest of your sleeve. Makes good sense. And as always, I picked up some extra stitches, one stitch at least on either side to close up any kind of holes that you might get there. The biggest mod, aside from the neckline, which I'm still fussing with, as you know, is that I'm going between sizes for Erin. So Erin, the measurements that I have, the bust size that she would wear was the original upper part of the sweater, and then I'm going for a different size for the hips. So I'm working some very subtle, I think, increases under the arms here. And this is where I began the increases. So about an inch underneath where I provisionally cast on my stitches. I, gave it an inch so that the reason I do that is because, you have a bust size that you're going for and you don't want to immediately change the bust size when you get to the bust, right? You want to let that bust size sit there and be a bust size for about an inch or so. So I didn't start my increases until about an inch later. I don't think you can really see them in this fabric because of the ribbing, especially once it's washed. But I like the subtlety of that whole thing. So let's see if you can see them on camera. This is the first one here, and what I did is in between these two ribbed pieces where there's a purl, I added a knit and a purl stitch. So it goes 3 knits, purl, knit, purl, 3 knits, right? And then I think I calculated 13 rows later, I added the other 2 knit stitches in. So then that completes the pattern. So down here you can see we just added an extra rib right in the middle there, and you can't really see it because this just wants to go together, right? So here it goes 3, 1, 3, 1, 3 again, right? And then I chose this spot to add the next increase. So the first 2 stitches were here, the next 2 stitches happen here, and you can see we get an extra rib. And I just think it just opens it up just very subtly on the side. You could also do this if you wanted to add kind of like a dart effect in the back. You would need to do it in 2 places to make it even, and you'd want to be careful about where you were selecting to add your extra rib, but I could imagine doing it here and here, and then doing it again, stair step on the way down on the outside. So you could do it in either place. That was the coolest mod. I love increasing in pattern, and we talked about that on the podcast. We've talked about it a number of times. I remember I was working on a colorwork sweater many years ago and learning how to increase in pattern for the sleeves. Or decrease in pattern. Now I'm trying to remember. No, it was an increase because that was from the cuff all the way up. and it was working increases in pattern. And we have actually a thread over in the Ravelry group about this. And I wish I could remember which Raveler it was, but someone shared some excellent tips about increasing and decreasing in pattern for color work over there. So if you're working on specific increases or decreases in, a textured pattern, in a rib, in color work, I'd love to keep sharing tips and tricks over in that thread. So head over there. I'll leave a link to it in the comment or the description below in case you just want to transport yourself to the Ravelry thread to either add to it or learn from it. It's a really great resource so far. So yeah, those are the main mods. The other things I'm wondering about, this pattern does end, and you'll see this in the next episode in the new year. It does end with switching from a 3x1 ribbing to, I think it's a 2x2 ribbing with one of these lateral braids kind of in between. I'm of two minds about that. On the one hand, I feel like, you have to do something at the bottom of a sweater because you don't want, even with this rib, you don't want to end up with like a curl or with some, it looking kind of unfinished. I think what I might do though is just do a very subtle turned hem, or do kind of what I did up here. This is why I'm torn. When you go from ribbing to ribbing, it can create, kind of like an off step, and it's a very visual thing to me, and it just kind of like sensorial, like it bugs me. So I don't know how I'm going to handle the bottom of that. I gotta think about that. But if you happen to be over on the Ravelry page of the Turntable Pullover and you look at projects, you'll see what I mean. And if you have suggestions for how you've handled something like that, like a sweater that was, had a ribbed body, what did you do for the hem? I'd love to know because I want to have options. I'm thinking through a lot of different options, but I haven't settled on anything yet, so I am open to suggestions. Please let me know. Now, the other thing I did this week, knitting-wise, was some repairs. Now, you all will probably remember this is Tink, our little dog's winter coat, little winter sweater. This is the Alasuq by Lincoln Newman. She also has a human sweater with this pattern on it. I love this pattern. I think if I remember right, I think I did it in her original colors, which have faded now a little bit because this sweater is 3 years old. But it's these beautiful reds and golds and blues and grays and greens. And this pattern does have 3-color knitting. I know. I never thought I'd knit a dog sweater that had 3-color knitting color work in it, right? Fancy dog sweater. She does get many compliments on this sweater when we're out and about. But this thing is 3 years old. I've been saying that I love this is the Alafloss Lopi, the thicker lope, the heavier weight Lopi. I've been raving about how these Lopi yarns last, like the endurance of them, the kind of like their tenacity, their ability to not wear out. And it's been 3 years, so I stand by what I've said. But I looked at the underside of her sweater the other day and noticed on this side there was a tiny little, there was a wear mark in the bind off on this side. This side had some more serious and deeper kind of problems. They went kind of down maybe 2-3 stitches into the ribbing. And I've got some footage that I'll put in here about me doing this mending. So on the side that had the bigger chunk missing, let's say, and in the video you'll see that it looks like I've already it looks like a bigger chunk than was actually true because I had already pulled out just to see what was going on, pulled out a lot of the yarn. But it was deep enough. It was a deep enough place of mending that I needed to pretty much take all the ribbing out and start over. I pulled it all the way down to where the picked up stitches were around the edge. And once I had the picked up stitches, I didn't feel like a need to pull out and pick up new stitches because the stitches themselves seem pretty sturdy. And the entire fabric is incredibly felted. As you'll see with me using the needle to pull these stitches out, these fibers want to be together. They have bonded very well. So pulling it out was not all that easy, but I got it down to those picked up stitches. And then I just picked up the stitches and started ribbing again, just ribbed up. I had extra yarn in the same color, and you'll see that, this yarn here looks a little bit different than this yarn in terms of color, just because it's new, it's straight out of the ball. It's not been worn for 3 years. So I just, did my ribbing and did my bind off on that side. and it's as good as new, right? I mean, it was great that the hole that had started hadn't gotten into the actual body of the sweater, because that would have been a little bit more of a pain in the butt and would have required some actual mending, as opposed to just redoing the ribbing. And on this side, like I said, the little spot, the wear spot, was very small, and it was just in that bind off. But when it's in the bind off, it usually means, if you're going to redo the bind off, you might as well redo the whole bind off, because then, you've got some strength right there in your sweater. So I pulled off the bind off, picked up my stitches again on my needles, and just used new yarn to bind off. So you can see that this yarn here, and in the video I've got, this yarn looks like a slightly different color than the rest of the yarn for the armhole, but that's just because it's brand new. Once it gets worn and washed and all that kind of stuff. Speaking of washing, I really do need to wash this sweater again. But I, again, will say, Lopi yarn, man, this stuff, it just rocks. It's just lasted forever. Tink likes it. It is super felted on the inside. I'll show you. This is where the color work is. You can see that it's almost like a rug. Like it wants to be together. So yeah, so that's all finished. And now it's all ready to go for cold weather again. Again, this is the Alasuq dog sweater. There's a separate pattern for this. And if I'm remembering right, I knit this one before I knit any of the other Lincoln Newman patterns, because this was back when Lincoln Newman was just getting popular, and she didn't have any books in English, but she did have a dog sweater pattern in English. So I knit the dog sweater pattern to get a sense of her style as a pattern writer and like how she did things with sweaters. And then went on to knit one of her Norwegian language knitting patterns, like a human sweater. And that was the Hopi sweater, and I absolutely loved it. It has since been gifted, so I don't have that sweater anymore. And I believe that Lincoln Newman's book that it came from has been translated in English. So I think you can get it on, all the major book buying sites. You can get her books. So maybe we should switch over to books for a second, because I wanted to tell you some of the books that have been coming out lately that I'm excited to get into over the break. It's funny, I'm a professor, as many of you know, and I'm writing a book about textiles and chemistry right now. I just finished chapter 3 about moths. Yay! Little mini celebration. So that book hopefully will happen in the next year or so. I have 3 chapters finished, 1 more to go, and then, intro, conclusion, got to send it off to the publisher and see if they want it, that kind of thing. Just the little things. So it's kind of funny that I'd be reading a lot more over break, but that's what I do. It's one of my favorite things to do. So a few books have come across my viewer space in the last couple of months that I haven't had a chance to really read, but I picked up copies of. So Patty Lyon's Knitting Book of Tricks. If you've seen this one come across your email, or you've seen it pop up in your feed somehow, I'm really excited about this one. I watched a couple of Patty Lyon's classes, I think. I read some of her blog posts. I watched some of her YouTube videos. I like her approach to knitting. It's very similar to my own, which is that there's not really a right way to do something. There are just multiple different ways to do it, and there's usually a hack or a trick that will make your knitting better. I've long wanted to go through all my notes and compile all the tricks I've learned into one place. And I just looking through this book, it looks to me like that's what she did. And she's got some things in here that I had never even thought of, like fixing certain gaps, or this question of, she has some stuff on ribbing. Ooh, and ribbing into ribbing. This is going to be good. Okay, anyway, tons of good tips and tricks in this one. I'm looking forward to it. If anybody else has read it or wants to talk about it, maybe I should just open a Ravelry thread about these, because then we can talk about all these books. One of my cool people that I follow is a tech editor, Sarah Walworth, and she runs the Tech Editor Hub over on Facebook. Offers lots of really interesting, tips and tricks for tech editors. And I'm in the middle of taking the masterclass on grading, and she's one of the teachers for that. So she and Christina McGrath came out with the Knitting Pattern Writing Handbook. So this is, it's largely for people who do, designers who write patterns, or tech editors who edit patterns, obviously. But I think for those of us who are interested in how patterns work, and interested in some of the decisions that designers make, and how we If you've ever been interested in thinking about designing something or figuring out why something works and why something doesn't work when you read a pattern, cool book. I'm interested in it because of the tech editing aspect of it. But I'm also interested in patterns. So I think that'll be fun. Okay, now this one has been on my shelf for quite a little while, and I've been reading a lot of histories of knitting because I've been writing this book. Most of the stuff I've been reading is from the 1920s to the 1960s or so, because I'm focused on that mid-century kind of American moment in textiles, but that doesn't mean you can not read everything else. So this one is This Golden Fleece, which many of you have probably heard about. This is Esther Reuter's book about British knitting history that she's kind of written through her own knitting journey, if that makes sense. So it's part her story, part knitting history, which is one of the styles that I really like and I'm trying to work on for the book that I'm writing, which is a little bit of me, a little bit of, science technologies about knitting, basically, and about cloth and wool and all that stuff. So I'm interested in her style, and I've been wanting to read this for a long time. So it's on my list for this winter. Oh, there are pictures in here too. Lots of fun stuff. And I love knitting history. If you've been following the podcast for any number of forevers, my bookshelf is full of knitting history books, and so this one promises to be fun to read. And speaking of which, we've got, this one's heavy. I don't think I'm going to read the whole thing over break. I don't think I'm going to have time for that. But this is Norway's Knitted Heritage, and this is Annemor Sundebau's book. This is maybe the third book of hers that I have, totally in English, which is unusual. Some of her other books are not in English, but I love having them. And this one is just a gorgeous, it's like a coffee table book. It's one of those books where you're like, what? I mean, it's just, yeah. I'm going to try to hold it up here so that you can see some of it. We'll flip through it. But total stuff about all the way back, history of Norwegian knitting, tons of stuff on the sweaters, the patterning for the sweaters, what are the inspirations for that? Where do they come from historically? The mills, the people, you name it, it's going to be in here probably. And for someone who's a sweater knitter like myself, I love looking at other traditions of sweater knitting because they tend to coalesce depending on how long the tradition has been around for. They tend to coalesce around really interesting techniques that often define how the sweaters work and look. And anyway, so this one looks really cool, and I've had it on my shelf for the last couple months and haven't had a chance to really sit down with it. So one of these days I'm gonna make a cup of tea and a cookie and sit there and just go through this whole thing. Annemor Sundebau, for those of you who don't know, she took over a shoddy mill. I think it was a shoddy mill. That had basically piles of sweaters and mitts and clothes and long underwear and all kinds of different things. And in sorting through those piles, she discovered that the piles were like archaeological, geological. You could go back in time by going through these piles of knits that she had. And so a lot of her research comes from trying to figure out when those sweaters were from, where they were from, what's their story, all that kind of fun stuff. So this promises to be yet another part of that series, I think, which I'm looking forward to. And then the last one, because I've really started working on needle felting a lot, is creating felt pictures. This is a little one. This is by Andrea Hunter, and it was recommended by one of the needle felting groups I'm in on Facebook, I think. And it just goes through a lot of different ideas about art, needle felting as art. And I don't think of myself as an artist, so I don't know a lot of these tips and tricks about focal points and proportion and stuff that I remember hearing about or learning about maybe back in middle school art class, but never really took on board. So this one looks like it'll be a really neat kind of tour through some of those basic ideas for creating landscapes, which is what I like to do. There's also a really cool portraiture, black and white portraiture needle felting class that I'm hoping to take at some point in maybe next semester. It's online, but yeah, I like that kind of stuff. I like learning from other people, reading, hearing about their classes and things like that. So yeah, those are all on my list, and I'd love to know what's on your list. If you have books on your shelf that you're looking forward to reading that you haven't gotten to yet, we can set up a Ravelry thread, and that way we can all share and have some fun. And speaking of needle felting, the other thing I finished was my Rainbow Goblin study, and I'm not sure how it'll come out on the camera because of all the lights and everything. So I have some footage of me putting this in the frame that I will pop in here probably instead. I've been using these shadow box frames because they allow the felt to not be pressed down like under a traditional frame. So I found that in doing the needle felting, one of the things I really like to do is leave some relief, like let the felt do some stuff that's three-dimensional. So these shadow frames have been really cool for that kind of thing. And I love the way this one turned out. It was a study, I think I said in the last episode, a study of a page in the Rainbow Goblins book, which I read as a child, and really just loved and had a good memory of and thought it would be really fun to try to needle felt it. Two different mediums, like a matte painting versus like a needle felt art, landscape, which very different mediums and very different materials, and just really fun to kind of play around with. So yeah, frame that up. Felt good to have that done. And last but not least, I promised you some ideas for travel knitting. I'm going to be on a plane for the first time in 4 years, which will be a little bit weird. And I wanted to have some non-sweater knitting that's just kind of easy to carry around. So I am going to go for the Musselburgh hat by Isolde Teague. And then I've been wanting to knit some mittens. The last lined mittens I knit were these beauties from Tanis Fiber Arts. I love them. Like, I can't even explain to you how much I love them. And they have this really beautiful lining, which is incredibly soft and wonderful. I can't wear them because they're just too pretty. I know that sounds really silly. I hear myself saying that, and I'm like, why am I saying that? Just wear your knits. But sometimes you just can't do it. So these I love, and what I want are a pair of them that I can wear and not have to like think about. So yeah, I'm gonna do a pair of lined mitts. And I found I could use this pattern again and just not do the color work or do the color work or whatever. But what I did find was the double stuff mittens by Capsese. Seasy? S-E-A-S-E. Green Mountain Spinnery. They're lined mittens. They have really great reviews on Ravelry. Lots of people have made them really successfully. They look like fun. 2 small projects I can take with me on the plane. Kind of excited. Yeah. So that's the kitchen sink. That's the winter break edition. That is all the things in my knitiverse that are going on right now. I'd love to know what you all are up to. Whether you're knitting, weaving, spinning, what else is there? Needle felting, tatting, all the things. Whatever you're doing, baking, having some fun. So yeah, leave me a comment. Let me know how you're doing. And I hope you have a good holiday season, whether you're doing Hanukkah right now, Christmas later, whatever you're doing, New Year. We'll get to Valentine's Day eventually. There's always something going on. Yeah. I'll see you next time. Take care.